Hi, flight instructors and NAFI members. Welcome back to another episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. Today's episode is actually going to be sponsored by David Clark Headsets. They are a brand new NAFI sponsor. They make fantastic headsets. If you've ever seen anybody wearing the green headsets, you know where they came from. So thank you, David Clark, for sponsoring it. Today, my guest is Brian Schiff. Now, this is unique content for the podcast. We're pretty excited about that. And we're actually going to talk about something that Brian and I were talking about the other day, and it's going to be a lead into an article in Mentor. And it's how does a flight instructor or a training instructor or a corporate check instructor keep themselves out of their own way? How do you keep from getting upset when a student decides to find their own style and decides to fly the coop from what you've originally told them, even though they're still right? So Brian, welcome.
Thank you. I think it's a great idea. It's unfortunate we weren't recording that conversation. I think most of the time, if we recorded our conversations when two CFIs get together at lunch or dinner, you'd probably have a great podcast.
I think so too, although we'd probably have to edit some of that out. So yeah, basically I was telling you a story about how recently I have become a training instructor for the 135 outfit that I work for, which is a huge honor for me because I finally get to unite my two worlds. I get to put my CFI hat back on, and I get to fly the cool shiny airplanes that I get to fly and have fun doing it. And so I've taken it very seriously. I've only done it for a few months, and I've gotten some compliments, which is humbling for me. But at the same time, it's one of those things where I train up these baby birds. I send them off onto the line. They go fly with other people, and of course, I always tell them, I don't need you to do it my way. I just need you to do it sort of up to the standard operating procedures for the company and, obviously correct and legal. But then I've also found myself flying with those pilots again after having released them for a couple months and going, well, wait a second, you used to do it this way. And then I realized, well, they used to do it my way, and now they've done exactly what I asked them to do. And now I'm internally getting a little upset about it.
So first of all, congratulations on becoming an instructor pilot for the Czech Airmen. And it's a wonderful opportunity. It means somebody trusts you and has a lot of faith in you. And now you get to partake knowledge, which is why we flight instruct to begin with, and to help other people learn, all aspects of flying. So congratulations on that. You're going to enjoy it. You will become a better pilot yourself because you're going to just learn so much more because you're forced into studying and teaching and doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where I think the pilots you're training did a cooperate and graduate thing and did what you wanted to do, how you wanted to do it. And then they went out and, worked into their own habits and implemented their own way of doing things.
Yeah. Which, like I said, ironically is exactly what I told them to do. But now they're coming back with me, and I'm feeling a little bit, I don't know, defensive probably isn't the right word, but you just feel weird about it. You're like, well, you were so great. And then you realize, well, they were so great to me because they did exactly what I told them to do. How does an instructor, and this relates to instructors of all levels, sim instructors and private pilot, commercial pilot, 121, 135. How do you get over yourself and allow them to find their own way and realize that it's not wrong, it's just different?
Right. And that's a very good question. And I think it's a good thing for you to write about because a lot of instructors have trouble getting out of their own way. For example, I went out on a layover. I forget where I was, but I sometimes on a layover, I'll just go get checked out to rent aircraft at a local flight school while I'm on a layover somewhere. And it's kind of fun. And when I come back, I can rent airplanes because that's how much I love my job. When I'm not doing it in between doing my job, I like to go do what I do for a living. So that tells you you're doing the right thing. But I went up with this new instructor, and during the checkout, I could feel his feet on the rudder pedal while I was flying the airplane.
Mm.
And so he's, I think that's a sign of insecurity. I think what you need to do as a check airman, as an instructor, you need to be secure in your own flying and your abilities to get out of a situation or recover from a situation. But I think you need to give a lot of latitude. I think demonstrating is good, and then let them do it. Let them do it their own way. Sometimes you'll see a better way by watching another pilot try and do the same maneuver that you just did, or whether it be an approach or whatever. So let them do it as long as it conforms to the policies, procedures, regulations, what the AIM says, and you have to give a lot of latitude.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And in a lot of self-reflection, I think that what I'm trying to get the best out of people, which is a true statement, but I also don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy that is asking for perfection. I don't want to be that guy that is unsatisfied with something that's completely okay to do. And you don't want to walk around with sort of that nose held high that says, well, the other captains that you're flying with aren't doing it the way I want them to, so shame on them and shame on you. Because that's not what I have at heart at all. It's purely
Right.
just a matter of you want people to be the best, but you have to be relaxed enough to let them find their own the best.
You do. And so you need to stay on glide slope. You need to stay on localized. You need to keep them centered up, whatever that looks like on your instrumentation. There are a number of ways to do that. Is pitch controlling altitude, or is it pitch controlling airspeed? I don't care. Whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call it, as long as you keep the needles crossed. So there's a number of ways that some of the techniques are just semantics. And so I like to watch and see how somebody does. First, if they can't keep the needles perfectly centered, then I might offer some advice. Okay, I see you're not doing that as well as you could. Here's a technique. And I think it's very important to differentiate technique from procedure. The procedure is we stay on centerline. The technique is, well, I might just use a little rudder just to push the nose over a little bit. I might fly with slight bank angles to stay on localizer. But everybody has different techniques on how they fly the airplane. Keep it comfortable. I think that's a procedure. But there are different techniques. So I think it's important to differentiate when you're providing a technique versus a procedure. That's one step.
Yeah, well, and there's a third there too. I think the reality is that sometimes we just don't keep the center line on accident. Sometimes you just have those days, or the weather conditions are what they are, and
well,
it
you
doesn't
probably do that.
necessarily mean
Yeah.
anything. It just means that at that moment they might have lost track of it, or frankly, I might have lost track of it. Happens to the best of us.
Right. And on that note, that actually made me think of something kind of important, how to get out of your own way, like you're talking about, is if you see a pilot stray from centerline, that's not the end of the world. We all mess up. We're not perfect. It's a constant series of corrections. But if you see a pilot stray from centerline and be okay with it and accept it and stay one dot paralleling the localizer, or staying exactly 50 feet low the whole time, so being off is not the problem. Not correcting or making an attempt to correct back to it, that's a problem. So I think when I have a check airman tell me, hey, you're off your altitude, but I just got off and I was about to start correcting, that's annoying to me. So as an instructor pilot, what I do is I give them an opportunity to make that correction a little bit longer than you think you need to. And then when they don't do it, that's the time to step in. So don't be harping on and nitpicking before they have an opportunity to make corrections.
Well, and there's two other points that I've been thinking about, and one of those is when I look back to my very first few students, and I've seen some commonalities with this in the 10 questions video series that I've done. I will tell you and fully admit that I over prepared my students. You meticulously go through every single detail. And I'm not saying that that's not a decent thing to do as an instructor, but at some point you figure out, like, okay, it's worth harping on this. It's not worth harping on that. You can condense the whole thing. And so I wonder if there's a little bit of that going on in here. I'm still so new as a check instructor that I'm like looking at it through a microscope instead of the mile high view that maybe it needs a little bit.
Sure, I think that's valid. So the phrase "choose your battles" comes to mind.
Right.
You know, there are some policies that or regulations that, if broken, can be quite dangerous. There are some that, okay, these aren't necessarily the end of the world. And one that comes to mind is the sterile cockpit rule. I've once flew with a Czech airman who briefed. I was a co-pilot, and the captain, Czech airman, told me and briefed me before the flight that he really wants to respect that sterile cockpit rule, and he's going to be strict about it. I'm like, great, that's fine. We can all follow the rules because we get lax on that. That's one of the rules that I know that pilots relax a little bit too much on. Well, does that cause accidents? I don't know. That's debatable. We can talk about that a lot. But so we're taxiing out, and I see the windsock blowing a pretty stiff tailwind to the runway that we were supposed to depart on. And I turned to him and I said, "Hey, Cap, look at that." He goes, "Stop. Nope. Shh, shh. I know it's hard." He stops me from talking because it's sterile cockpit, and I'm looking at this windsock. But I got out enough to get him realizing what I was about to say. He was triggered to stop me from talking, and he did stop me. But it was a pretty important safety-related item. We're about to take off. It looked like a pretty good wind shift and a tailwind. So he stops. I could see him, his wheels spinning, and he knows that he just stopped me and he did the wrong thing. And he looked over at me and he said, "Brian, why don't you ask the tower?" And I'm like, "Jim, no, stop. I know it's hard. It's really hard to." And he felt horrible. But I was just being funny, and I was just joking about it, and he felt horrible about it and apologized about it. So we can be very trigger happy to follow some procedures, and to the point where, okay, sometimes it's okay to break sterile cockpit. Sometimes we do that.
Yeah, and I believe you said that at one point, but maybe not now, that you were a training instructor at the airline that you work for. Is that correct?
Yes, I've been a Czech airman on the Boeing 727 and the MD-80.
Did you encounter any of this? I mean, it's weird, and maybe it's just that I took so much time off between taking primary students and getting into this. But did you have that same feeling?
Yes, I did. When I first started as a Czech airman, I wanted to be perfect, and to my own fault, because the students, or the other pilots who flew with me, would be uncomfortable because it's just, you're too nitpicky. And then I wound up relaxing over a period of time, and a number of years later, as I'm teaching, I know what I can relax on, what I don't want to relax on, but I need the guy that I'm flying with, or gal, to be comfortable with me, and I point out what's important. And there are times when I would be a little bit more relaxed than others, and I think it's important to not have someone stressed out about you picking up on minutia. I had a captain one time tell me that I was being lazy holding my heading, but I was looking out the window for traffic because we were down low. And he goes, "You're 3 degrees off your heading." And I said, "Wow, that's pretty good." And for me, and he goes, "Well, I think that's pretty lazy." And I reached up and I grabbed the DG and centered it up on the heading I needed to be. I said, "How's that?" So I think nitpicking 3 degrees on heading or little tiny things like that can make somebody uncomfortable. So when I was a brand new Czech airman, I did that more. And as I got to relax, I realized, okay, I need to teach this airplane. I need to teach our policies and procedures, but I don't need to be very nitpicky. I think that just creates a tough relationship and makes it uncomfortable.
And that's what I finally came to the realization with. I was flying with one of our first officers that I had actually flown with just about exclusively during COVID. And, him and I could basically read each other's minds, and that was great.
Yeah.
I ended up flying with him again after not having flown with him for a couple months. And he had, finally gotten out from underneath my wingspan a little bit and came up with his own ways of doing things. And I started talking to him about it, like, "Well, why aren't you doing it this way?" And he's like, "Well, I found out this." And I kind of went, "What am I doing? why am I getting on his case about this stuff?" Because he's not wrong. And it started to bother me to a point where, like, now we're having this conversation. Because the other thing that you mentioned in what you just said, and also the other day, was nobody wants to necessarily, if they're just flying a 135 trip or a 121 trip, and they're with a captain, Czech airman or not, if they're not in training, they don't necessarily want to be receiving flight training from every captain that they fly with. It's kind of off-putting.
Yeah, I agree. As a co-pilot, having been a co-pilot for many years, there were pilots I loved to fly with and captains I hated flying with. I noticed that when I flew with captains that nitpicked me, were just sticklers and looking over my shoulder the whole time, I screwed up more. And I found when I fly with guys who are relaxed, laid back, they're still in command. You can still be be in command and be an authority without really being nitpicky and being annoying. When I flew with them, I actually flew better. I held my altitude better. I was beautiful on the approaches. My landings were better. I was relaxed. And so I try to do things to make my students relax. When I flew with those kind of captains, I try to do what they did to make me comfortable. And sometimes I'll break sterile cockpit just to show them, hey, everything's fine. I had a co-pilot I was flying with one time, and in the flare, he's just floating and floating. And I looked over at him. I said, hey, want me to request lower? And he just starts cracking up, and he put it down. But it's little things like that, just being comfortable, not nitpicking. And sometimes the nitpicking can happen later, like at the end of the flight when you're debriefing. That way you're not making the flying uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because a lot of times I'll have conversations with some of our members who are airline captains or training captains for airlines or 135 or Part 91 and or even 142. And they kind of say, well, what is NAFI doing for somebody like me? Or how do we as a group sort of collect our peers that are in those worlds? And the biggest thing is trying to find ways to relate everybody together. And this is one of those conversations, which is why it was important that we had this, because again, if you had talked to me years ago when I first started, these were the exact same things that I was talking about with my private pilot students. So it's the game changes, but the lessons are the same.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's a very important conversation to have. And as far as what NAFI can offer, I think more of these conversations getting out there and getting more of a mix. One of the advantages, that you and me get to have when we're flying with multiple co-pilots or different crew members is we get the benefit of seeing some of the things we like, some of the things we don't like. Many GA pilots only fly with one instructor. And so one of the things I really like to encourage them to do is go fly with several people, fly with different instructors, take a potpourri of those things you like from those pilots and leave what you don't like. But I think having this conversation and more of them with more people, and if we can vary this up with different flight instructors, every time we get more instructors on here doing these programs, I learn as an instructor better ways to teach something, or even as a pilot, better ways to do something.
Yeah, and no instructor or pilot wants to be the guy that nobody wants to fly with. You want to be the one that everybody goes, man, I learned so much from that person, and that person made me feel at ease. And that's the art form that I'm in the process of learning right now. And I'm sure there's many out there that are going through the same thing that I am.
Right.
And it's all because we care,
It is, and you'll fall into that groove. You care so much now that you want to make a pilot perfect. And so striving to make a pilot perfect, I think, is where you're struggling a little bit. And then so you made them perfect, but they're not going to stay like that. You want to get them to a point where they can develop themselves, where they can be safe. It's a license to learn, so to speak. And you get them to that point. But if you get them to a perfect, level where they've memorized what you like to do and all these little tiny tasks and cooperated and graduated through your training, that's not going to stick. You want to get them thinking right. You want to get them evaluating and making decisions for themselves. It's kind of like, teach a man to fish. You want to get the pilot thinking on his own and get him to an acceptable level where he can go learn and develop his own techniques. But you have to provide the skeleton for that, not necessarily all the fat and the meat and the hair that go outside of that.
Well, and somehow I got to figure out how to make myself perfect before I can expect it out of anybody else, because we're not there yet.
But also don't think that you have to be perfect. You don't.
Right.
You have to be safe. You have to be legal, and you got to make it comfortable for the passengers. Those are always the criteria, the biggest three criteria. And if you do that, it's okay to be less than perfect. I tell you, nothing will make a student feel better than when the instructor is not perfect. And they will feel better. They'll feel like, hey, he's human, just like I am. Here, I'm doing a commercial student. Here, watch this lazy 8. It was the ugliest thing you've ever seen. I think that was a lazy scribble, not a lazy 8. So I'm going to do it again. It's hard. It's difficult. That's why I screwed it up. And when the student sees that you can do that, I think they feel more comfortable. So, work on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for those out there listening, I don't care what aspect of training you're in any level. I'd like to know what you think. I'm writing this article. I'm hoping to have it for the November-December edition of Mentor. And I'd love to be able to include feedback and tips and suggestions to make myself better, but also to be able to share that with the rest of the family here at NAFI. So if you want to email me at nafi@nafinet.org, I'll filter through those and we'll include the comments in the further conversation that we have. So, Brian, any final thoughts?
Well, I encourage them to do so, and we have so much experience out there. So tapping that from our membership, I think, is great. I'm eager to hear what you get from that, because I always like looking for a better way to teach something and improving myself as a flight instructor. And I think that's one of the things that when you're a new CFI, you talk to experienced CFIs about, hey, how do you do this? How do you actually teach the pattern? How do you teach a student to do this or that or whatever? But I'm looking forward to that. As instructors, I think don't aim for perfection, aim for great, and reach it. It's okay to fall short of perfection and be okay with that. And so remember also, I think there was another thing that I provided here not long ago. It's in the recovery. It's not in the mess up. Everybody messes up. So be okay with a student messing up, but recovering okay.
It's in the recovery. See NAFI Notum's blog, nafinet.org. And Mike Jesh, I'm looking at you. Feedback. Sarah Rovner.
These are great instructors. I look forward to hearing what they say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for listening.
Thanks.